Section 19 of Pictures and Problems from London Police Courts. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Peter Yearsley. Pictures and Problems from London Police Courts by Thomas Holmes. Chapter 12. How the Poor Live and Die. Part 1. One hot afternoon in July, in the hottest year of recent times, a man of about 35 years of age sat on a chair outside a very poor house in a very mean street of Hackney Wick. There was not a breath of air stirring, and though the sun shone brilliantly and the street was redolent with unsavoury smells, the poor fellow found the rays of the sun and the smells of the street preferable to the insufferably close atmosphere of the very little room, first floor back, in which he had lived for the past 18 months. I had just come from a room where misery, poverty, and marvellous heroism had been strikingly illustrated. I neither saw the man nor smelt the unsavoury odours, for I was thinking of what I had seen, when I heard a faint but choking cough, one that told its story. I looked and stopped, and found myself face to face with the man on the chair. His high cheekbones, his hollow cheeks, and emaciated body and limbs told me that not much longer would he gasp for air in that unclean street, or lie waiting for death in his very, very small room. "You are very ill," I said, and he nodded his head. "What is the matter?"
"Consumption, but it is nearly all over."
"Would you not be more comfortable in a hospital?"
"I have been in the chest hospital, but there is no hope."
On further inquiry, I found that he was a single man, had no relations who knew or cared about him, and that he had come from the hospital to live with strangers, hoping that his time would be short. "But how do you manage to live?" I asked.
"Ah, sir," he said, "it is a race, and I don't know which will be gone first, my money or my life. I knew years ago what was the matter with me, and I have been very careful and saving, and I did hope that I should leave enough to pay for my funeral."
I got him some cooling drink, and told him that I would call and see him the following Tuesday, when I should again be in his neighbourhood. I called on the appointed day, but his chair was not at the door, for he lay in his little room. When I went in, he gave me his poor thin hand, saying, "I am glad you have come." I told him that if it gave him the least pleasure, I would call every Tuesday afternoon. He looked at me and said,
"I am glad, because you have kept your word."
There was sad suggestiveness and deep pathos in his words and look. I had no need to inquire what he meant, for they told of promises lightly made and wickedly forgotten, of hopes raised never to be realized. After sponging his forehead with a little toilet vinegar, and putting a handful of flowers where he could fondle them, and a little fruit where he could reach it, I left him. Week by week I called upon him as he lay there waiting for the end in his stuffy little room. All the night long he lay alone, a very small, evil-smelling lamp for his companion. But night brought no relief, no welcome coolness, and all the night long, he told me, he lay and wished to God it were morning. But the morning and the brightness of the sun brought no welcome change, so during the day he lay and wished for the cool of the evening, for to sleep he had become a stranger. One day I called, and he was in great pain. He could not keep still, yet he had not strength to move. I wanted to soothe him, but I did not know how, so I said to him, "How can I help you?" With his burning eyes he looked at me and said, "Ask God to let me sleep. If I could, I might be easier, or die." I knelt down by his bedside, and, taking his poor hands into mine, I prayed that sleep might come upon him, and then, silent and still, I knelt there hand in hand with him for some minutes, and lo, he gave his beloved sleep. Quietly withdrawing my hands, I left him peacefully sleeping, and took my last look at him, for I never saw him again. It was now well into August, and I had to leave London for a few weeks. The first day of my return I went to see him, but his final sleep had come, for he was dead and buried. On inquiry, the landlady told me that he had given her, just before he died, enough money to pay for his funeral, so the race had been run and the pauper's funeral had been avoided. She gave me a scrap of paper with some writing on it in pencil. I have it by me now. I never knew his name. He never knew mine. What did they matter? But this is what the paper says. "Tell the kind gentleman I am not ungrateful. I hope he will forgive me, for I think God will. I cannot bear it any longer, and am going to end it. He will not see me again." I was told that after my last visit he again became sleepless, and that one day he got up and put on his clothes and wandered tremblingly into the street, making, as it seemed, for a canal close by. He told no one his errand. Slowly, step by step, he went, till his weakened limbs could carry him no farther, for he fell exhausted close to the canal, but closer still to death, for he was carried to his little room, and God have mercy upon him. He left no debts unpaid. The rent of his little room had been discharged. All his landlady's claims had been satisfied, and his account balanced. No assets, no liabilities. And the simple annals of the poor, in the sordid misery and dirt of our slums, furnish many an instance of stern independence and unfailing industry. But heroes are of no sex, and so I want to tell the story of the poor widow who lived but 6 doors from my unnamed friend. I had been visiting her when I came in contact with him. I met her at the police court. She had been dragged from the Lee and charged with attempted suicide. Her garments, few and old, clung to her like cerements. Her hollow cough told its tale, and her face spoke of a pathetic hopelessness. She was a matchbox maker, and, as I said, a widow. Her husband had been a woodcarver and a worker in the ragged school. It was the 4th anniversary of his death. "Promise me, Mary," he had said just before his death, "that you will not let the children go into the workhouse." She had willingly promised, and to her that promise was sacred, but it cost something to keep it. She buried her husband, gathered her children round her, and with her bits of furniture went into one room and proceeded to make her matchboxes. She had 4 children, and the youngest, a girl, was but 2 years old. I know that room, for I have been in it scores of times. It measures 10 feet by 8. I know everything in that room, from its miserable bed to its paltry cupboard. I know the rent of that room. It is 3 shillings weekly, £7 16 shillings a year. She has now been in it 9 years, and has paid over £70 in rent for that mean room. Here, with her children 4, she set to work to redeem the promise made to her dying husband. Here, in Christian London, she made matchboxes at 2 farthing a gross, finding her own paste and thread. Here, in the land of the free, she made matchboxes for 14 hours a day, 7 days to the week. Here she earned 1 shilling 3 3 farthings a day for her stint of 7 gross. Here she earned 9 shillings 2 farthing for her week's work of 98 hours, plus fetching and returning her work, and minus the cost of her thread and paste. And so she essayed to live, and so she did live, for she had had 4 years of it when I first met with her. Too hopeless even for despair, she became a machine, and her heart became dead within her. No parish allowance for her. Organised charity had nothing for her, and no sister of mercy or parish clergyman had visited in her little room, for she kept herself to herself. But I have forgotten an important item. The widow had a widowed mother, old and feeble, but who supported herself, and out of her penury allowed her daughter a shilling a week. For 3 years and 9 months after the death of her son-in-law, the tottering old woman carried the shilling weekly to her daughter, and then she died, and the shilling died with her. The loss of her mother and the shilling awoke some feelings in the dead heart of the matchbox maker. For 3 months she struggled on with her lessened means and the increasing wants of the children, and the anniversary of her husband's death came round. That afternoon, as she sat at her matchboxes, looking through her window, she saw a dead body drawn out of the lee. At midnight there was a cry raised, "A woman in the lee!" So next day I met her in the police court. She was not punished, God forbid, but the worthy magistrate kindly committed her to my care, so I went with her to that little room, 10 feet by 8. I saw the wistful children, almost famished, and sadly wanting clothing. I sent in food for them, and next day went again with clothing for all of them. I took them out and bought new boots for them all, mother included. I wish that I could describe the scene in that boot shop when the children had on their new boots. Some people might have smiled and have been amused, but I could have choked, for, God help us, it was pitiful. The younger ones were filled with joy and childish wonder. The elder boy, about 11, looked up and down, first at his boots and then at myself. His mouth twitched, he half laughed and half cried, until I said to him, "How long is it since you had a new pair of boots?" "I can't remember having a pair," he said. But there sat the poor mother, hopeless and apathetic. The children's joy never stirred her, nor did their wonder move her. I paid her little debts. I filled their cupboard with food. I stopped her from work. I compelled her to go out of doors. All this I could do, as I continued to visit her, but no smile could I bring to her face, no hope into her heart. I got her nice clothing, but even that created no interest. There was nothing but dull, passive apathy and increasing weakness. It was summer-time, so the children were sent into the country, and the widow accompanied my wife and myself to the seaside. 2 other women went with us. Both had broken down from sheer hard work and hopelessness. One was a fur sewer, and had thrown herself in front of a train. The other, a blouse maker, who had taken laudanum. Let me picture the poor woman, as I often saw her, and still continued to see her, in that village by the sea. She was too weak to walk, so we placed a chair for her on the sands. There she would sit, hour after hour, with the same hopeless, apathetic, far-away look upon her face. Still and impassive she sat, save for the mysterious movements of her hands, for these were ever at work, 14 hours a day, 7 days to the week, continued for years, had made those hands automatic, and they would make matchboxes in spite of her. Nature had its pound of flesh. Still, oxygen, rest, good food, did much for her, and human sympathy helped by and by to cheer her. After a month she returned to her little room, to her children 4, and to her matchboxes, but not to 14 hours a day, not to 7 days a week. I reduced her stint to 7 hours per day and 6 days per week. For 4 years I paid her rent and clothed the children, until her eldest boy was placed in a situation and was able to help his mother. Reluctantly I then let her go, for new and fresh demands are ever made upon me. Still, she was not entirely forgotten, and a little help was sent her from time to time. Several years passed, when, in company with a friend, I called upon her, still in the little room, still at the everlasting matchboxes. Time 1:30 p.m. From 6 a.m. she had been at it, and had just finished some work that must be sent back to the factory. She had earned 7pence halfpenny. I wish again that I could describe the woman this time in her room. There in the corner is the little bed, and but scant clothing upon it, but the poor sheets are clean, Upon it lies her youngest child, a girl of 8. She has lain there 8 weeks ill and unable to move. No parish doctor for the mother. She is still too independent, and loves her child too much to think of it, and she still remembers the promise made to the girl's father. So she works the harder and starves herself the more, in order to pay 2 shillings a visit to a doctor. I timidly suggested the infirmary for the child, but well I knew what the response would be, and it came. "Don't separate us, Mr. Holmes. My heart is broke, I shan't be long after my child," was all I could get from her. So I had again to begin my task, for I could not leave her in such misery. I told her story to friends, and liberal help was sent for her. I was enabled to furnish 2 rooms for her and the children. The boys had grown taller, but again they got good new clothing and boots, and better situations were found for them. The little girl was again sent to the country, and is now going to school. But the mother, the devoted, struggling mother, sometimes makes a few matchboxes, but oftener she lies ill in her bed, from which she will sometimes rise, and with failing strength, but with desperate endeavour, try to wash the sheets and clothing that have been provided for her. And so down to the grave she will go, working and struggling, her only hope to live long enough to see her children self-supporting, a hope that will not be realized. And such lives abound. It is my sad duty to meet with them. It is my joy and privilege to help them. Great are the opportunities given to my colleagues and myself to right some of the wrongs, to undo some of the evil that our present-day civilization inflicts upon the innocent and the helpless. Men and women, apparently forgotten alike of God and man, meet us. Their very hopelessness appeals to us, and it must not appeal in vain. I can fight with a dipsomaniac, as Paul fought with beasts at Ephesus. I can throw myself into the existence of a burglar till he becomes part and parcel of myself. I can feel a deep pity for the vice and drink-smitten women upon the streets of London. But to the poor, the honest, hopeless, struggling, dying poor, my very heart goes out. They are for a prey, and none delivereth, for a spoil, and none crieth, Restore. But do you meet with any gratitude? I am often asked, for the ingratitude of the poor is a pet theme with many. I don't go about the world looking for gratitude. If I did, I should not meet it. I want to see wrong redressed, toil lessened, comfort increased, homes replenished, children made glad, and sad hearts comforted. If I can see these things, I get joy, and never think of gratitude. But nevertheless, it comes to me, even when I do not look for it, and the following instance may show it. A married man had been sent to prison for 6 months, and richly he merited his sentence, for he had grossly assaulted his wife, mother of 8 children. He was a violent drunkard, and it was by no means his first offence. The wife was sadly injured, and was broken and nervous from the repeated assaults. But the home had to be kept together, and the children fed. She lived in the slums, and became the prey of the sweater. One Sunday afternoon I called at her house, and knocked at the door, but there was no answer. The glass panel in the door being broken, I had no difficulty in gaining access. The various families in the different rooms took no notice of me, as I went upstairs to a room the door of which stood open. I stood on the threshold for a moment, and took in the whole scene. The woman, facing the window that overlooked a miserable yard, sat at a sewing machine, the incessant rattle of which told me that she was working for life. Her back was towards me, so she neither saw nor heard me. Before she had finished her seam, I had time to notice that the floor was covered with ladies' blouses, at the making of which she was earning the fancy price of 10p per dozen, finding her own machine and thread. Last week she had made 12 dozen blouses, and had sat at the machine 108 hours for her 10 shillings, earning somewhere about 1 penny per hour. She finished her seam, threw the garment to the heap, and turned to take another, when she caught sight of me, uttered a frightened scream, and fell off her seat into the heap of blouses. I called to one of her neighbours, and we gathered her up, when I could not fail to notice her condition, soon again to be a mother. I put the strap of the machine into my pocket, and left her 5 shillings, the price of 54 hours' work. In a few days I called again, and found her in bed, waited on by a little girl of 10, who had now another little sister. A reference to this particular visit, and the poverty she was in, is made in the letter, of which I give a copy. But there, lying weak and ill, she inquired for the strap of the machine, which I gave to her, and in less than a week from her confinement the rattle of the machine was heard in her room. I continued to visit her till the time approached when her husband would be released, a time to which she looked forward with dread. She told me this repeatedly. The day the husband was released I went to the house to meet him, for I thought my services might be useful. The husband was there, but the wife had gone, taking her children with her. None of the neighbours knew where she had gone. She had kept silence on the matter, but gone she was, much to her brutal husband's consternation, for he was now homeless. I tried several times to find her, but quite in vain, so I gave up the search. But I knew she was hiding from her husband, and was afraid to let me know her address, lest he should find it out. 2 years went by, and I neither saw nor heard anything of her, when, on Christmas morning, I received a letter which contained no address or name, but it was from her. This is the letter. Dear Sir, I hope this will find you and all your family quite well. I hope this Christmas will be a happy one, and that in the new year God's blessing may be with you in all your labours. That you may have good health and happiness, I sincerely pray. That your life may be long spared, I earnestly hope, for you to cheer the oppressed and the broken-hearted. You will, I know, continue to feed the hungry, and to clothe the naked, and to visit the sick, for you have done it to me many a time. Sometimes, when I have lain helpless on my bed, waited on by a little child, with only thin water gruel without sugar to eat, you, sir, have come in with your helping hands, and have said, you must have something better, and you would bring it. Had it not been for you, my children would have gone hungry many a time, for often the last slice had gone, and the last bit of coal had been burnt, when you would again come in and bring more. I do not ask anything from you. I shall not let you know who I am. I am almost past help in this world, but I feel that I must let you know that your kindness to me is not and cannot be forgotten. May God answer the prayers I have offered for you. They shall be answered, for the King himself shall answer, and say unto you, inasmuch as you have done it unto one of the least of these, you have done it unto me, and you shall enter into joy. May God bless you, from a poor well-wisher. And that was from a slum woman, but not born in the slums. To me, there is no cant in that letter. I know it is permeated through and through with heartfelt gratitude. I never found her or heard more from her, but I feel that she no longer dreads the return of her brutal husband, no longer makes blouses at 10d. per dozen, no longer makes the machine fly 18 hours for 1 8d. For ere this, the weary woman is at rest, and the wicked cease to trouble her. This awful life of the slums, how strangely it acts and reacts upon our poor humanity. It brings out the worst, it brings out the best, it debases men and women, it ennobles them. Vice and misery rampant cruel, but purity, love, and gentleness are not absent. Outstretched hands and suppliant looks tell that many are eager for the least boon that pity can bestow, but stern, unyielding independence is by no means an absent quality. End of section 19. Section 20 of Pictures and Problems from London Police Courts. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Peter Yearsley. Pictures and Problems from London Police Courts by Thomas Holmes. Chapter 12. How the Poor Live and Die. Part 2. But I must tell another story of the same summertime and of the same locality, for my unknown friend, my matchbox widow, and the poor blouse-maker lived within a few minutes' walk of each other, and close by is a horrid, unclean court, and the sun poured its torrid rays into it. It is a very narrow court, and frowsy women from their doorsteps on either side can bandy words with each other. Sometimes they meet in the roadway, and fights are not unknown. Women of a positive character live in that court, and coming home at 2 o'clock in the morning, make it hideous with their lewd and drunken blasphemies. Labouring men live there too, some of whom, on returning from work, find their wives drunk, and no semblance of an evening meal, then hey-ho for the crashing blow, the brutal kick, and the yell of the trampled wife. In a room on the ground floor of one of the houses lies a woman waiting for death. Death that tarries, for she has lain there for months, and was so long, so unconscionably long in dying, that her husband, by assaulting her, had tried to expedite the process, and was sent to prison for 6 months for his pains. Her little bed is underneath the window, close on the pavement, and she can hear the wrangling of the women, the crying and the quarrelling of the children, the blasphemy of the unfortunate, the maudlin talk of the drunken wife, and the blow of the brutal husband. She has no respite from these things, neither has she any respite from pain, for she is in the last grip of internal cancer. She has been operated on twice in a London hospital, but there was no hope. So she said, "I will go home and die among my children." She has 4 of them, and the eldest is a girl of 14, who earns 4 shillings a week at a laundry. The husband no sooner receives his well-merited 6 months than out of a neighbouring workhouse comes an old woman of 65, mother of the cancer-stricken woman. She enters into an agreement with a working man who has lost his wife, to keep house for him and look after his 5 children. 4 shillings a week she is to receive for her onerous task, and every Saturday afternoon the old woman's 4 shillings are added to the 4 earned by the girl, and not till the cancer has done its worst or its best, not till the grave has closed over her daughter, not till the husband has come back to his children, not till then does the old woman seek again the shelter of the workhouse, there to wait for the rest and oblivion that has come to her daughter. Week by week, for 6 months, I visited the cancerous woman, giving her such help and comfort as I might. But what a 6 months for her! Unable at length to take food, she starved slowly towards death. But she lasted till the husband came back to her. And he came drunk. He had earned a gratuity of 7 shillings while in prison, and he was violently drunk at midday when I arrived on the scene. I soon drew his attention to myself, and as he followed me along the street and was grossly insulting, he again got taken into custody and was remanded for a week to give his wife time to die. Poor woman, she cried after him, and with her failing breath, told me she wanted to see him once more before she died. She had her wish, for after a week's remand he was discharged, and I saw it that he went home sober, for I went with him. In a week's time there was a parish funeral from that court, attended by an old woman of 65 and a girl of 14. Brave old woman! The £5 you so hardly earned shall be appraised at its proper value by Him who noted the widow's mite. You can go back to the workhouse and there die, cheered, comforted, and strengthened by the knowledge that you enabled your daughter to die outside, and the memory of that shall come to you as an angel's smile when the time comes for you to join your daughter. But there are poor people outside the slums, and suffering is borne with marvellous endurance in many respectable streets. Unfortunately, married men, well placed, will commit crimes, and have to pay the penalty, or rather, their wives and families pay the penalty. Mercy, how they suffer! If the crime, one against property, be repeated, as it often is, then the very perfection of suffering is felt and endured by the wives and families left behind. Their friends cast them off, for the lustre of their respectability must not be soiled, even by contact with a suffering wife and innocent children. Down, down they go. Bit by bit the home disappears, until there are only a few relics left of a once comfortable home, and these are worthless. Pass along some of these streets, and you will find cards in some of the basement windows announcing plain needlework done by hand, or pianoforte taught on moderate charges. My life for it, there are tragedies being enacted in those breakfast parlours down in the basement. To such a place I went one Christmas Eve. A man who had held first-class positions was sent for trial on a charge of embezzlement. 3 terms of imprisonment for similar offences had not sufficed to cure him of dishonesty. When he was convicted, I saw, weeping at the back of the court, a decent-looking woman who carried a sickly-looking child. I had some conversation with her, and found that the prisoner just committed was her husband. She lived 2 miles away, and had walked to the court carrying the child, 2 years of age, because she had no money to pay her fare, and the child was too ill to be left at home with the other children. She wanted to see what became of her husband, who, to use her own expression, had been so good to her. I saw that the child was dangerously ill, and that she herself was faint, so I gave her a few shillings and sent her home in a cab, promising to call upon her. About a fortnight elapsed before I did so, and as I descended the steps that led to her breakfast parlour, I heard the strains of an old, worn-out piano, and the sound of children's voices. Curiosity prompted me to stand outside a moment before I rapped, when I learned that children were dancing and singing within. I thought at first I would go without seeing her, for I came to the conclusion that things were looking up and my assistance would not be wanted, but I ultimately decided otherwise, so I rapped, and she came to the door and asked me in. "You are merry tonight," I said to her. "Hush," she said, as she led me into the room among the children, of whom there were 12. They were all nicely dressed and had slippers on. There was not much in the room. On the floor was a very worn and faded carpet that had been a good one, and, as I have said, the pianoforte was a very old one. I could not understand, so I said, "You are having a party, I see." She did not speak, and I could see that her eyes were swollen and red. Presently she lit a small lamp and beckoned me to follow her into a small bedroom, divided from the front room by folding doors. As we went in, she closed the doors carefully behind us, and, with the little lamp in her hand, went up to a small bed and turned down the sheet, and then looked at me. I took the lamp from her and looked. There lay the 2-year-old child that I had seen at the court, but its sufferings were over, for it lay cold and still. "And you are having a children's party?" "Oh, no, no. I must do it or starve. The children pay me 6d. a week, and come 3 evenings to learn dancing and a little singing." Yes, she sat at the old cracked instrument, playing, whilst happy children danced, and the child of her own body lay dead within 6 feet of her. Yes, and she also went to respectable houses to teach music, playing, and singing, where they paid an accomplished woman 3d. per lesson of 1 hour's duration.
So she lived and worked and hoped for her husband's return, for he had been so good to her. I gave her such clothing as enabled her to appear respectable, for respectability demands that a music teacher, even at threepence per hour, shall not appear poor. But some streets are so respectable that Mrs. Grundy will not allow the music teacher or the plain sewer to exhibit their cards in their windows, either in the basement or the third floor up. It must not be known that poor struggling women pay exorbitant rents for single rooms in such houses, but they do nevertheless. Whited sepulchres are many of these houses, and the cheap lace curtains at all the windows and the artificial plants make pitiful pretence of comfort within. To such houses, and the various rooms in such houses, I am no stranger. I have seen old women hugging their respectability and ready to perish. I have seen younger ones living lives that have filled me with wonder. I have seen husbands and wives hoping against hope, and trying to comfort each other, for not always does love fly out at the window when poverty comes in at the door. In the top room of one of these houses I met with the most wonderful instance of sisterly devotion it has ever been my lot to meet with. I will picture it. 2 sisters, only servant girls, but their room is scrupulously clean and even tastily furnished. The furniture is old, but the best is made of it. A pretty screen keeps the draught from the bed, on which lies one of the sisters, who is 24 years of age, and has lain there 7 years. A piece of linen steeped in eau de cologne is across her forehead. Underneath her half-closed eyes are dark rings. The cartilage of her nose is almost as thin as writing paper, and is constantly quivering. Her face is pale as death itself, and her faint breath comes in quick vibrations from the top of her throat. Yonder sits her sister, at work with her needle. She is almost as pale as the invalid, and suffers from occasional hemorrhage. 10 years ago both parents died, and the elder sister made a promise to her dying father that she would look after the younger. Some of the furniture was put safely by, and hand in hand into service both girls went, and a year or 2 passed. But the younger one was delicate. The influenza soon got hold of her, and remained with her so long that she had to leave service, but not for the hospital or infirmary. An empty room was taken, the remains of their parents' furniture was put into it, and to her lonely room and bed the younger one was taken. 4 and 6pence weekly was paid for that empty room. They had saved a little money, but a servant's wages are small, and it soon went. After the influenza came all sorts of complications, paralysis and spinal disease, etc. So the younger sister, a child in appearance but a woman in years, has lain on her bed ever since, nursed, waited on, lifted in and out of bed by her sister, who worked for the pair. For the first 4 years the elder sister remained in service, nursing and keeping house for 2 old ladies, visiting her sister every morning, washing her, tidying the room, and putting her food to hand. This had to be liquid food in a baby's sucking bottle, for this was the only way in which the younger could take nourishment, and, her right arm being helpless, the bottle had to lie close to the left. Every night, after she had put her old ladies to bed, the elder would return again to the younger sister, and arrange for her comfort during the night. The younger one was left alone day and night, except for the sister's visits. This was their life for years, but her wages were not enough to keep the pair and pay rent, so she took in plain sewing, unknown to her sister or the old ladies, and sat regularly into the small hours of the morning, stitching away for private customers, hence her cough and hemorrhage. But the old ladies died and were buried, and had no more need of her services. So now the sisters are living together, and stitch, stitch, stitch is the order of the day and night.
She does not work for the factory or the sweater, but for private customers who like their work done by hand, and done well. Done by hand, and her earnings are no better than the matchbox makers or the blouse makers, for £1 a day is the average. Yet she never complains, but goes on steadfastly, quietly, and persistently with her work and her duty. Seeking no help, and hiding her poverty from the world, on she goes. No change, no holiday, no rest, excepting when she herself is ill. Then, to keep the knowledge of that illness from her poor little sister, she wraps herself in a rug, and takes her rest, not on the bed, but on the hearth-rug. And very thoughtless many ladies are. A couple of months, the elder sister worked nearly a week and earned 5 shillings. The work was all for one lady, who praised the work when it was taken home, saying she would send her more, and pay for them altogether when the work was finished. Weeks passed on, and there came no more work, nor the 5 shillings that were so badly wanted. 4 applications by letter were made before a postal order was received to discharge the debt, and the poor creature lost 4d. in postage. Evil is wrought by want of thought as well as want of heart, is a truth that I have often seen illustrated in our police courts. A woman about 36 years of age once stood in the dock, charged with being drunk. Her head was bandaged, and her mantle, which had seen much better days, was covered with blood. She had fallen from a tram-car, was picked up insensible and smelling of drink, was taken by the constable to the police station, and the doctor fetched to attend to her injuries, who stated that she was recovering from the effects of drink, so she was charged. She gave no name, no address, nor occupation, and when before the magistrate she was silent, except for protesting tearfully that she was not drunk. She was ordered to pay the doctor's fee, and, having no money, was placed in the cells. Through the little trap-door I spoke to her, when I noticed that she had a parcel with her, also bespattered with blood. She was badly hurt, and quite broken-hearted at being a prisoner. I might have paid her 3 and 6d, but I saw that she was ill, and not fit to go home by herself, so I begged her to tell me where she lived, that I might see her friends. She resolutely declined at first, but after an hour in the cell she sent for me, and told me where she lived, but asked me not to call till 2 o'clock, as her aunt, who lived with her, would not be home before. At 2:15 I called, and the rap I gave at the door told me that there was no linoleum on the passage floor, and but little furniture in the house. To my surprise, a nicely dressed and beautiful girl of about 16 came to the door. I told her that I had called to see the aunt, and had come from the niece, who was injured but not seriously. She told me they had been anxious about her mother, who went to take some work home the day before, and had not returned. I did not tell the girl where her mother was, but took stock of the house. There was no carpet on the floor, and 3 Windsor chairs, a deal table, and a sewing machine formed the only furniture. No other goods save 2 oil paintings without frames on the wall. I looked at them and said to the girl, "Whose portraits are these?" "Grandpa's and grandma's," was the answer. "They were gentle people?" I said. "Yes," she said. "We used to have a carriage when I was little." Just then I heard someone fumbling with a latchkey at the door, and presently in came the aunt, old and wrinkled, bent with age and trouble, dressed in old-fashioned and badly worn clothing, black cotton gloves an inch too long for her fingers. She stood and looked at me askance. I told her my errand, for the girl had left us alone. The trembling old woman sat down, put her glove-covered hands to her face, and rocked herself backward and forward, and I could see the tears trickling down. Presently she stood up and tremblingly drew off one of her gloves and said, "That's all we have in the world, sir, and that is my parish allowance. I have just been to fetch it." I looked at her old skinny hand, and there in the palm lay a solitary half-crown. The girl was called in again, when I told her that I was taking her aunt to her mother, and that shortly both would be back again. The old lady was so feeble and excited that I had to support her till we got a conveyance. When we got to the court, I had again to give her my arm, but when I had paid the doctor's fee, and the cell door was opened to her niece, she wanted none of my support, for as soon as she saw her niece coming up the passage, she loosed her hold of me, and with eager steps and a pitiful cry ran towards the tottering woman, and presently their arms were round each other, and the bruised face of the younger woman was laid against the furrows and wrinkles of the older woman, while their tears blended together. I thought it best to see them home, but they did not offer to tell me who they were. They did, however, tell me that the girl was a member of a well-known choir, and was only home for a short holiday. I found out, though, what had brought the younger woman to the police court. She had taken home some finished work to a lady, who praised it and gave her more work to do. Unfortunately, she did not think of paying her, but more unfortunately still, she gave her a glass of spirits. Doubtless it was meant kindly, but it was disastrous, for the woman was weak for want of proper food, and in just that condition of body and mind when some food would have been most useful. Having to return home by tram-car, and the inside being full, she had to mount the outside. Just as she got to the top, and before she could get a seat, the car started, and overboard she went. The spirits had doubtless made her a bit giddy, but she told me that she would not have fallen but for the car starting too soon, in fact, before she was off the steps. I called again to see them. The girl had rejoined her choir. The wrinkled old lady sat in the almost empty house, thinking, everlastingly thinking of the past. The younger one, with her bruised face and head still bandaged, sat at her machine. Once more I called, and the house was empty, and a bill was in the window. They were gone, and I never knew where. Neither did I ever learn whence they came or who they were. But this much I did gather, that the aunt's means, as well as the fortune of the family, had been squandered by the husband of the younger woman. End of section 20. Section 21 of Pictures and Problems from London Police Courts. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Peter Yearsley. Pictures and Problems from London Police Courts by Thomas Holmes. Chapter 12. How the Poor Live and Die. Part 3. So many gently born come down into our slums and compete with the poorest of the poor for a bare and miserable existence, but they mix not with the coarse and the lewd that abound around them. They seek no help and never flaunt their poverty. Silently and in obscurity they go down to their doom of starvation. Sometimes they will come to the court and gasp their sorrow out to the magistrate, but not often, unless indeed it is some man or woman brought low by their vices. In such, self-respect is dead, and they are ever ready to trade upon their past affluence, and are by no means ashamed to beg. But those who have been brought low by the wrongdoing of others present a pathetic spectacle. I have before me now an old letter which came to me at the police court. It reads as follows: "Dear Sir, for God's sake come and see us. This is a forlorn hope." As it gave the name and address of the writer, I went, and again it was Christmas Eve. The snow lay deep on the ground, and a hard frost had bound it together. The fog was choking and almost impenetrable, when, about 7 in the evening, I found myself knocking at the door of the house. There was no light in the passage, but someone, I could not see who, answered the door. I inquired for Miss G—, and the voice said, "Downstairs." The door closed. The owner of the voice went away, and I was left in complete darkness. I struck a match, and by the aid of its feeble light found the ramshackle staircase that led below. I groped for a door, found one, and again knocked, and it was opened. A middle-aged woman with an old shawl round her head stood before me, a small benzoline lamp in her hand. Her face was so swollen that her features would not have been recognised even by friends. I told her my errand, and she asked me in, and gave me a chair. It was an uncanny place. The fog penetrated the room, and the small smoky lamp scarcely relieved the gloom. I had not been seated a moment before I was aware that there was something or somebody alive in one corner of the room, for a difficult and almost choking breathing was very audible. Beyond asking me in, the woman in the shawl had not spoken, so, lifting the little lamp from the table, I went to the corner, and very soon found a pair of eyes gazing into mine. The eyes and the breathing belonged to another woman, who lay on a miserable bed in the corner. She was evidently near death, and could not speak to me, so I found my way to the chair. "Who is she?" I asked quietly of the woman in the shawl. "My sister." "She is very ill," I said. "She is dying," was the reply. "Have you had the doctor?" "Yes, the parish doctor has just gone away, and he says she won't last till morning." "Why did you write to me?" She cried silently for some time, and then she told me that they had lived together for years, getting a living by making ladies' aprons, etc., for the shops, that for a long time past her sister had been failing, and that for the past 3 months she had lain on that bed. She told me also how her own eyes had been gradually weakening, and her own earnings had fallen off, and, to make things worse, for the past month she had been half mad with neuralgia. So they had got behind with their rent, and the landlady was constantly abusing them and threatening to turn them out. They were the daughters of a once thriving tradesman. The dying sister had married a professor of languages, and, with her husband, had lived for a long time in Germany and France. Her husband had lived expensively, and died suddenly, leaving his wife unprovided for. She herself had kept house for her father. She scarcely remembered her mother, and after the death of her father, who left her some little money, her sister joined her, and they tried to eke it out by doing needlework. But their earnings were small, and by degrees their bit of money went, and now sickness and death had come, and they were penniless. I made no more inquiries. I could see for myself that poverty and death were in that murky room. So I satisfied the landlady, sent in some coals, nourishment, and a better lamp. On Christmas Day, by the aid of this lamp, she saw her sister die, and a few days afterwards she stood by the grave of that sister, who had been given a common, very common, interment by the parish. Several years they had lived in that underground room. A street grating was over their only window, and over that grating children played, and hundreds of people tramped daily, knowing nothing of the tragedy going on underneath. But I helped her out of the cellar to a first floor back, where there was a good window. I obtained a pair of spectacles to aid her weakened eyes, and she said she could keep herself, for old women think they can do wonders. I heard no more of her for years, but one day there came a small package to me. There was no letter, but the package contained a silver German coin, nicely mounted and made into a brooch. It was wrapped in a piece of paper on which was written, "In memory, forlorn hope." Either the workhouse or the grave, most probably the latter, has swallowed her. But the numbers of poor women, devoted sisters, who go hand in hand to the grave is not limited. I have met with many such. About many of them there is nothing picturesque, no story to tell, but their lives are lives of devotion, and one might well marvel and say, "Behold how these sisters love each other." The faults of the poor are well known to us. If they are not, 'tis not for the want of telling. The marvel is that they are as good as they are, for of many it may be said, hope is not for them, and yet to go on, month after month, year after year, with their self-imposed duties, with their hard, onerous, and ill-requited toil, uncheered and uninspired by hope, makes the marvel the greater and their lives the more noble. Some, as I have shown, become apathetic and work on as machines, but still on and on with their drudgery they go, until welcome and well-earned death comes to them. But with others it is far different, for their hope has turned to bitterness, and though they never dream of relinquishing the struggle, and never seem to realise that old age is coming upon them, yet they retain a stern, rugged, and sometimes even a pugnacious independence when, after many weary years, well-meant assistance is offered them. Hope deferred maketh the heart sick. But let me tell you a story. I have told it before, but I want to tell it again. Standing in the dock of one of our police courts is a tall, spare woman of 55. Her dress is of rusty black, and has done duty for many a year. Her bonnet, surmounted by a veil, is also black and of ancient type. Her face tells of years of suffering, and bears that wistful look that is generally found on the faces of those that are stone deaf. The gaoler stands beside her with a slate, on which are written down bits of the evidence for her to read. The officer in the witness box says that about 10 o'clock the previous night, a cold, dark night in February, he was on duty by the Lee when he heard a splash and a cry. By the aid of his lantern, he saw a black object in the water. He swam towards it and found the prisoner, who said, "Let me die! Let me die!" With difficulty he got her out, for she had tied a satchel round her waist, and in the satchel he found a flat iron. Following the officer in the witness box came a little elderly woman, a small edition of the prisoner, but bent with hard work, her face furrowed and wrinkled. Her hands were twisted and gnarled like the roots of a tree. Every joint was enlarged with rheumatics. They told a tale of hard, incessant toil. For 30 years, day after day, year after year, she had stood at the wash-tub and scrubbed out the social salvation of herself and sister. The prisoner, she said, lived with her, and had done so for many years. 30 years ago her sister had brain fever, and lost completely her sense of hearing. She was also detained for a short time in an asylum, out of which place she came to live with her. She had been ill many times since, and lately had not seemed happy. Yesterday the witness went to fetch home some work, and when she got back, her sister had disappeared. Under an inverted basin on the table she found 2 pennies, a piece of cake, and a note which read as follows: "Dear Emma, I have been a great burden to you. For more than 30 years you have worked for me, and now you are getting old and will not be able to work for me much longer. Goodbye. You will never see me again." She begged the magistrate to allow her to take her sister home again. Her sister was no burden to her. She could easily keep her, and would promise to look well after her. The magistrate kindly agreed to this, and asked me to render what help I could, so I went home with them, and I shall not forget going, for that poor little home is before me now, with all its spare, old-fashioned, respectable poverty, and its scrupulous cleanliness. It bore eloquent witness to the work and struggles of the pair. A week later I was in that little home again on a very glad errand. I had 10 golden sovereigns to give them, and my wife was with me to see the joy of the sisters and to share in my pleasure. 10 golden sovereigns! What would they not do for the sisters? Coal, food, warm clothing, and rest were all in those shining bits of metal. I loved the chink of the metal for the sake of the 2 women. The skinny arms were bared to the elbows. The gnarled and twisted fingers were in the soapsuds when I told her my errand and put the money before her. She looked at me strangely for a moment, and then, straightening up her old bent body, she lifted up her hands before me and said almost fiercely, "Sir, do you see these hands? For 30 years they have worked for and kept my poor sister. I have had no charity from parson or parish. Not 1 penny have I received from anyone, and, please God, I never will. I can work for my sister. Take the money back to the sender. I dare say it was meant kindly, but there is none of it for us." Argument and persuasion were of no avail. The indomitable little woman was proof against both. Not a penny would she receive. The money might be sent back, or I might use it for the poor who needed it, but not for them, not for them. So she gathered the money up and gave it back to me. Had I not taken it, she would have thrown it into the street. Foolish old woman, but brave, heroic old woman. We left her with full hearts, and the chink of the money was not quite so joyous. Years ago, timely help and kind sympathy might have cheered and comforted her, but now it is too late, for she will die rather than receive it. Years have gone by, but the pair are still living together. A few Sundays ago I met them out for a walk, both looking older and more feeble, their ancient clothing still more rusty, both living the same hard lives. Hand in hand, down to the grave they go. It will be a mercy if they can cross the bourne together, for brave, steadfast, and heroic in their lives, even death should not divide them. The story of Charles Lamb and his sister lives. His love and devotion to his poor sister will never be forgotten, for his love almost passed the love of women. Up and down the neighbourhood where these sisters live, Charles and Mary Lamb had many times wandered hand in hand. Can the example of the witty writer and loving heart have influenced the poor washerwomen? No, for she never heard of him. Only the promptings of her own true heart were needed. Only the feeble strength of a little woman was required. Only unceasing toil, only perpetual pain, only reticent poverty, sustained for many a year, and a life was lived, endurance exhibited, and a devotion shown that will compare with any lives of which I have ever heard or read, and will not lose in the comparison. But she was only a poor washerwoman. So, in their little homes, in their crowded tenements, high up in the blocks or low down in their underground bedrooms, the poor live, so they die. I could tell of their sins and of their vices, but that would be no pleasure to me. So I tell of their virtues and sorrows, of their patience and love, of their sufferings and wrongs. End of section 21.
Section 22 of Pictures and Problems from London Police Courts. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by David Muncaster. Pictures and Problems from London Police Courts by Thomas Holmes. Chapter 13. The Problem of Home Workers. Out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth must speak. So in this chapter, I deal with an old subject. Generations come and go. In 100 directions, improvement follows on the heels of improvement. For most men, the hours of toil have been considerably lessened. Factory and workshop inspection has done wonders. Employers' liability for the health and safety of their servants has been forcibly brought home. But, strange to say, the condition of the London home workers is practically the same as it was in Hood's time. True, the silent stitch, stitch, stitch of the needle plied by fingers weary and worn has given place to the never-ceasing rattle of the sewing machine, but little else has halted. For the incessant toil and misery of the workers remains as before, nay worse, for 100 other trades have sprung up to the seamstresses' company, the conditions of which are equally bad, and in some cases worse than the conditions under which the seamstresses live and die. Commissions have sat, inquiries have been made, Blue books have been filled with evidence. People have wept. Philanthropists have poured out their wealth, but all in vain, for the evil is still with us, to our sorrow and shame. It has often been urged against moving stories of fiction that while they stir emotions, they provide no outlet for practical sympathy, and that stirring the well springs of pity out of mere caprice is but to demoralize. I am afraid my last chapter is somewhat open to this charge. I know it has touched the hearts of a good many people, for I have received some hundreds of letters with regard to it. I also know, and have good reasons for knowing, that most of the writers were not content that their emotions should be stirred and no practical result ensue. You have saddened us. What can we do? What are you going to do? So wrote one lady, and she voiced the thoughts of many. Neither was it the female heart alone that was stirred, for I soon became aware that in writing on the sufferings of London's oppressed women I had touched the heart of humanity. We are full of troubles here, and we have our own sorrows, but I send you a draft for £25 to make some of those women happier. So wrote a member of the Legislative Assembly of Natal. I have been farming out here for 25 years, but I have never forgotten Hood's Song of the Shirt. I send you £10 to help those poor women. Thus wrote a farmer in Cape Colony. From Australia and from Ireland, Scotland and Wales letters came, and the purport of them all was, can't you do something to make these poor women happier? For more years than I care to remember, I had hoped and longed for a home of rest for these women, to which I could send the poorest of them. Africa and Australia gave me out of the goodness of their hearts the nucleus of that fund that enabled me to do it. But the women of London were not behindhand, for a number of them formed themselves into a farthing league. They could not give large sums for the support of the home. The members of the League pledged themselves to subscribe to its funds the odd farthing on every article and every yard of material bought at a draper's shop. Each member has a box into which the odd farthing or pence, as the case may be, are dropped. The members appoint their own secretary and treasurer. Even from our own royal family came a voice wishing success to the Home of Rest, and some help for the undertaking. While these combined to make my task the easier, what made it imperative was the sight of the weary-faced, bloodless women that sat on a chair in North London police courts before the magistrate. "Give her a seat," said the kindly magistrate. "She is too ill to stand in the dock." She had tottered into one of the police stations and given herself up for stealing a dozen skirts, which had been given to her to make 1 shilling and 3d per dozen. She finding machine and thread and paying carriage of the articles to and from the factory. It was cold winter time. She had 4 young children and a husband out of work. "You are drunk," they said to her. "No, no, it is the laudanum," she said. Her skirts had been finished, she had no fire, and the children wanted food. So she pawned them, kindled a fire, and fed her children. Then fear took possession of her. "I am a thief. They will send me to prison," she said. But she had a few coppers left. Laudanum was bought, but not sufficient to quench the faint spark of her life in the weak body. "I remand her for a week, take her to Holloway in a cab, but let the doctor's attention be called to her," said the worthy magistrate. In a week's time she was again before him, and promptly discharged. "Do what you can to help her," he said to me. Help her? Why, she scarcely had flesh enough to cover her bones, nor clothing enough to provide a semblance of warmth. She needed food, clothing, rest, fresh air, and human sympathy. I knew that in her own wretched home she could not get them. So I started my seaside home of rest for weary women. Here is my letter from her. Dear Sir, I am constantly thinking of your kindness, and I think that I should be ungrateful if I did not write to you. God has answered my prayer, for I asked him to take me out of trouble. Oh, sir, I have had only 1 day's holiday in 15 years, and that was when I went with my first little boy to a Sunday school treat. I felt that I should like to have more faith in God. I believe in him. I tell him my troubles, but I have no faith. I forget his day. She worked on Sundays. I am a happy woman, but my life has been so hard, so very hard. I am feeling stronger, but I cannot lose the horror of what I have done. But do believe me, for I am grateful to the magistrate and you for the great kindness you have shown me. Yours gratefully. 15 years of hopeless, unending toil and of practical starvation are enough to quench the hope that is said to spring eternal from the human heart, and without hope there can be no faith. How could the woman believe in a God of love? Her story is common enough. Down to my little home in Walton there has been a procession of such women. I wish that I could march them before my readers, each poor woman carrying a brown paper castle, for bags, portmanteaus, or boxes have not been seen amongst them. No elastic step among them. Bent bodies, faces wrinkled and like to discoloured parchment. Some younger bodies, but still whitish and bloodless faces, whose eyes are dull and no sparkle of joy in them. Plenty of passivity, but no glint of fire. Some with a child each, some with 2. For the children must be cared for. Some too, alas, bruised and battered, for even passivity of wage-earning machine wife is no security against the brutality of a husband when the potion works within him. Such are the women for whom I have been compelled to care. Sometimes I go down and spend a weekend with them, and I would like that I could do justice to a description of them, but I cannot. In the evening, before they retire to the strange luxuries of clean sheets, we gather round the piano and sing an evening hymn, and I listen to their quavering voices in every key and no key at all. Watch by the sick, enrich the poor with blessings from thy boundless store. Then I feel there is something wrong, for my eyes get dim and my throat lumpy. But I read to them, Are not 2 sparrows sold for 1 farthing? Not one shall fall without your Father's knowledge. Fear not, ye are of more value than many sparrows. I know they can make sure of the heavenly love. I would to God I could feel more sure of earthly love and earthly store too for them, for they get precious little of either. But while I am writing this, February the 6th, a letter reaches me from the matron, asking questions about my arrangement for the future life of one of the women, and like most ladies, she adds a postscript, P.S. Excuse this short letter, but they are making so much noise, laughing and shouting and playing ping-pong that I am bewildered. Sweated drudges, hopeless, broken women, laughing, shouting and playing ping-pong. I felt rewarded for my trouble. The sea air, good food and rest are fine tonics even in the winter. Appetite comes by eating. The desire to increase happiness increases by giving happiness. I am not content, neither do I want to be content. Did not old Augustine say, the man that says enough, that man's soul is lost? I have tasted the delight of making some of the poorest and most miserable glad, and I long to see more fully the realization of my hopes. I am told by some worthy people that I am spoiling these women. I want to. You will make them dissatisfied with their own homes. I hope I may, for the apathetic content of the poor with their dirt and misery constitutes the greatest danger. From such content may God deliver them. But who can estimate the value to these hard-working women of a few weeks' rest and refinement at a place where life-giving qualities of the sea may invigorate them, and its mighty diapason soothe them. But while the heart is touched and our sympathies are quickened at the suffering of these women, and while it is easy to be charitable and philanthropic with regards to them, what new condemnation can be brought against the social conditions and the sanitary conditions under which they live and work? To me it seems rank absurdity, savouring almost national insanity, that a country like ours, knowing what we know and fearing what we fear, should tolerate them. We have endless and learned talk about germs. Microbes are sought for and classified. Sanitation is reduced to a science. Isolation in fever or smallpox cases is rigidly insisted on. Yet in hundreds of fetid and pestilential dens of 1,001 articles of everyday use for the personal comfort or gratification of every section of the community and for every period of life are made. But nature knows no pity. Break her laws and she arises and smites you, when and where you least expect. As we sow, we must reap. And I would like to force it upon the mind of the nation that if we continue to make our blouses, shirts, children's pinafores and babies' clothing, our fur jackets and our cheap mantles, our toothbrushes, corsets, matchboxes and artificial flowers in the mansions of misery, in the dens of disease and death, then of a verity weeping and wailing, and a voice of mourning shall be heard in the land. Many must suffer, but they must be the innocent. So kiss your darlings, your firstborn proud young mothers. Put their pretty hats or bonnets on their sweet little heads. But if you had one glimpse of the room in which they were made, fear and trembling would take upon you. Hold up your heads, brave young men. Adjust your smart neckties. But if you saw the rooms in which they were made, and the fingers that made them, you would drop them into the fire with a pair of tongs. Here is a letter, dated April the 18th, 1901. Sir, pardon the liberty I am taking, but having read what you said about poor women working 14 hours a day, for a shilling per week, I beg to state my case. I am a tie maker, who, after working all week, cannot earn more than 5 shillings, and I have had a poor afflicted husband to keep who hasn't earned a penny for more than 10 years. Curiosity led me to that room, and though I had some difficulty in squeezing myself in, I was soon very glad to get out of it. There he lay on a miserable bed, for no means of clean. I had to sit on the side of that bed, and I felt uneasy. It was partially covered with ties or silk for making them, and he lay there with his decaying lungs, every few minutes his cough troubling him. I did not stay long, but long enough to see his wife 3 times put down her work to raise his head, that he might with difficulty expirate. Again, Sir, I see that you are going to help women home workers. I have begged 2 shillings from poor friends and send it to you, for my wife is one of them. I have been ill for 2 years, and as I watch my wife at work night and day, and how little she gets for it, I feel more than I can tell you. No address was given, so I never saw the room, but the fact remains that for 2 years he had lain there ill while homework was continually around him. I have been in rooms and seen sometimes sick or dying children, sometimes a dead child, where clothing for other children was being made night and day. I have breathed, or rather swallowed, the close, heavy, sickening atmosphere, and have come away feeling faint, but wondering into what homes the garments being made would go, and how the children would fare that wore them. I thought too of the old words, Rachel weeping for her children because they are not. The bodies of the poor folk who are engaged in these home industries are of necessity but poor bodies, so frightfully ill-nourished that they fall an easy prey to all kinds of disease, not only to chest complaints and fevers, but to all forms of disease. Skin diseases especially abound. The ill-nourished and the sickly plant develops parasites. The ill-nourished human does precisely the same. The weaker the animal life, the more it becomes the prey of myriads of relentless foes, seen and unseen, that are greedily waiting for it, while filthy air and water, vile rooms and insanitary accommodation, dirty bodies, endless work, and the hopeless apathy all combine to make home workers a danger to the community. I have no wish to raise any feelings of disgust. I am but stating bare truths that might be enlarged upon, but I forbear. Far be it from me to say one word that might divert an atom of sympathy from the poor. My heart is with them, and I know as few can know the difficulties that environ their lives. I know that it is impossible for them under their present conditions to be clean, decent and healthy. None the less, I repeat that their dirt and misery are a national danger. But see how this question appeals to the two primal instincts of humanity. First, to touch that of nature that makes all men kin, that leads men and women to sacrifice themselves that they may save others. And secondly, to the instinct for the self-preservation that is said to be nature's first law. I would that we were true to either. But I believe in the application of common sense when difficulties are to be solved, and I love justice. So I want my last words to be practical. Why should this evil and danger exist at all? Its very presence proclaims our lack of thought. It need not exist. It ought not exist. Consider the lives of these people. Do they work hard enough and the hours enough? Far too hard and far too many hours, everyone admits. Do they pay rent enough for the accommodation called their home? Most people will say far, far too much. Do they pay highly enough for their meagre quantities of wretched food? I may be told that the poor can get things very cheap nowadays. Can they? Come and see. I was visiting in the home of a widowed matchbox maker. Her sister, who had a crippled husband, lived with her, and was also a matchbox maker. This sister had gone with her broken-down perambulator to take a shilling's worth of finished boxes to the factory. The everlasting baby underneath, the boxes on top. A lady friend was with me. While she essayed to learn the art of box making, I stood on until the sister matchbox maker returned. Evidently, there had been something wrong, for the woman was breathless, and when she recovered, was a bit hysterical. "What is the matter?" her sister asked. "They gave me a bad shilling at the factory, and I did not find out until I got halfway home." "What did you do?" "I gave a boy a penny to mind the baby and ran all the way back." "Did they change it for you?" In reply, a genuine shilling was shown, but it was a near thing, a hair's breadth escape from financial ruin. How are those shillings spent? Again, I say, come and see, for here is the housekeeping account of another widow living in the same neighbourhood, a blouse maker. She had 4 children, a girl of 12, a boy of 9, a crippled boy of 7, and a younger child. The girl, who was, of course, deputy mother, had been charged with stealing some food, which undoubtedly she took to give to her younger brothers. In my visitations, I came across the widow's rent book, 5 shillings weekly, paid up to date. I found her wage book, with its pitiful tale of hard work and poor pay. I saw also the widow's housekeeping account and her expenditure of her last shilling. Here it is. Tea, 1 halfpenny. Sugar, 1 halfpenny. Bread, 1 penny farthing. Margarine, 1 penny. Oil, 1 penny. Firewood, 1 halfpenny. And a bit of bacon. When this story appeared in the press, I received 1,600 letters in a few days about the widow and her children, and England seemed to weep for them. By the aid of the Daily Telegraph, we were enabled to open 5 banking accounts and place them above the fear of poverty. But when that fear was gone, when the cupboard was full of good food for which the children no longer cried, the youngest boy died, for even a banking account could not save him. And so it happened that a kind-hearted public clothed the family in mourning, paid the undertaker's bill and cemetery fees. Will the dark path of the destroyer ever prove a way of life to the social heaven? Some day, perhaps, when we have suffered more. But to return to that widow's housekeeping account. A notable businessman said to me, "Do you know what strikes me most about that widow's housekeeping account?" I supposed the poverty of it. "Not at all," he said. "It is the horrible and senseless waste it tells of. Do you suppose that she gets a halfpenny worth of tea or sugar, or a pennyworth of margarine for her money? No, she loses on every purchase. She is bound to. The shopkeeper can't lose, so she must. Multiply the loss of that shilling by the number of shillings spent in a year. Why, it is frightful." He went to the root of the matter at once. The poorer people are, the greater the cost of living, the more abject their poverty, and the greater their need of nourishing food, the dearer they have to pay for the bare necessities. Come into a marketing street in a poor neighbourhood toward midnight on a Saturday. Watch the butchers' shops, and you will see poorly clothed and miserable women standing looking with wistful eyes at the meat. With a few hardly earned coppers, she has to provide some pretence of a Sunday dinner for her family. The joints are ticketed, and they are beyond even her dreams. She comes nearer and looks at the inferior pieces, and timidly inquires about the price, still too high. She looks again and again, until the butcher says, and not unkindly, "Buy some of these nice pieces, ma'am. Nice pieces. They have lain on the block all day, after being trimmed off foreign meat, ticketed English. Bits of mutton and shreds of beef on which the wind has blown. The dust and dirt of the street has found a resting place. Flies have paid them a visit. Dirty fingers of other speculative purchasers have turned them over again and again." She finds her coppers, gets £1.50 of the pieces, and takes them to her home, her one room, her larder and bedroom, workshop and kitchen, in which the whole family sleeps, and on the Sunday makes an inviting stew. But there are plenty who fare worse than this, and to whom even the pieces would be a godsend, to whom even a bit of macadamized cheese would represent luxury, and whose children from very birth are fed with material that would test the stomach of a dog or an ostrich. Can this go on, and the nation be free from the penalty? Impossible. And the penalty is paid all round. Now I have no wish for all difficulties to be removed from the lives even of the poor. Life without difficulty would be a poor thing, and hardly worth living. But I do claim that the poorest, the hardest worked of all London's toilers, should have the possibility of living in decency, cleanliness, and some degree of comfort, and be able to obtain clean and nourishing food. And it can be done. I know it can be done. But it can only be by organisation and combination, without which it will forever be impossible for home workers to get value for their money. I have had glimpses of a promised land, and in my fancy have seen the home workers organised and living in sweet content, organised not for strikes or lockouts, but for health, virtue, happiness, not in filthy slums enveloped with rank odours and moral and physical corruption, near the town but a little way out, where the free air of heaven can enter their lungs and the silence of the country speak to them in their communities, where each family had its suite of rooms, and each suite of rooms had its bathroom, where children had rounded limbs and merry hearts, where brave boyhood and sweet girlhood ripened and matured, where poor women hovered not at midnight for scraps of dirty meat, and where the miserable items, tea, a halfpenny, sugar, a halfpenny, were no longer known, for they had their own stories. Some day we shall enter this promised land, in which the jerry builder shall not enter, and in which nothing that is unclean or maketh a lie shall be found. And when we enter it, we shall hear the deep roar of a nation as it rolls its heavy curse on the buried past. We shall feel that the heart of England is lighter, the hand of the oppressor has been slayed. Then the mothers of England will buy clothing for their darlings without fear. No nameless terrors will haunt the dainty brush, neither will men or women's clothing convey contagion, or the smart necktie disseminate the seeds of death. For all these things will be made in light and cleanliness, and the brand of shame will no longer be upon them. Then the pioneers of the empire at the ends of the earth will be no longer sad when their hearts, touched by remembrance, vibrate to the magnet of their soul, their old country and home. For in the circuit of the sun gladness and joy shall be felt in the knowledge that the poorest of the poor in the world's greatest city have a chance for health and virtue, for peace and comfort. The end. End of section 22. End of Pictures and Problems from London Police Courts by Thomas Holmes.